Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are popping the hood on the wonderfully complex world of corporate finance. If you've ever wondered about the exact playbook multinational giants use to build their empires, maximize their power, and legally minimize their global tax bills, well, you are in exactly the right place. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with structuring the corporate family, move on to the profitability movie, check out the financial snapshot, follow the cash, and finally piece together the transfer pricing puzzle. All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, Structuring the Corporate Family. Step 1 in building any empire is getting the structure right. You can't just throw everything into one massive corporate bucket. You need a setup designed from the ground up to manage risk and give you ultimate optionality. To pull this off, you separate the entities. You set up a parent holding company, and its only real job is holding the securities of other companies. Down below the parent, you've got the daughter companies. These are the operating entities doing the actual day-to-day heavy lifting. Why do it this way? Risk containment. Plain and simple. Let's say one operating company runs a car dealership and another owns the real estate it sits on. If that dealership gets hit with a massive lawsuit, that toxic risk is beautifully contained. It won't sink the real estate, and it absolutely protects the mothership. And this leads us to the real-world superpower of holding companies. Take a look at Exor, one of the biggest holding companies on the planet. Check out the gap between their economic ownership and their voting rights. Exor owns about 20% of Ferrari's economic value, but get this, they wield 32% of the voting power. Same story with Stellantis, just 15.5% economic ownership, but a dominant 24% of the vote. It is literally a corporate cheat code. You get to wield outsized control over a massive empire without actually having to pay for an economic majority. Section 2, the profitability movie. Okay, so now our corporate structure is set up and protected. Next up, we need to track our performance using financial statements. To really wrap your head around financial reporting, it helps to think of the income statement and the cash flow statement as movies. They tell you the story of what happened over a whole period of time, like a quarter or a full year. The balance sheet, on the other hand, that's a snapshot. It is totally frozen on a single date, like New Year's Eve, showing you exactly where the company stands at that precise second. Let's actually watch one of these profitability movies, looking at Microsoft's 2025 fiscal year. They pulled in a mind-boggling $281.7 billion in top-line revenue. But what's really fascinating here is doing a vertical analysis. Basically, if revenue is 100%, how much actually survives the gauntlet of corporate expenses? Well, after paying for massive things like data centers, they hold on to a 69% gross margin. And even after deducting billions, and I mean billions, for R&D, sales, and admin, they still walk away with an operating income margin of 46%. Nearly half of every single dollar they make is pure operational profit. That right there is empire-level efficiency. Section 3, the financial snapshot. Let's pause our movie right there and look at that snapshot we talked about, showing what the entire empire actually owns and what it owes on one specific day. So, the golden rule of the balance sheet is right there in the name. It absolutely must balance. Take Microsoft on June 30th, 2025. Their total assets perfectly matched their total liabilities and equity at a staggering $619 billion. Think about that number. Everything from sprawling data centers to raw cash balances balances out perfectly against shareholder equity and unearned revenue. Which brings us to a fascinating, honestly, kind of magical asset on that balance sheet called goodwill. It acts as an accounting plug. When Microsoft bought Activision for $75.4 billion, they weren't just buying office chairs and game code. Activision's actual net assets were only worth $2.4 billion. Even after assigning a very generous $22 billion price tag to intangible assets, the math, well, it still didn't balance. So, by definition, the remaining $51 billion is recorded as goodwill. It's literally the financial premium a company pays for the future potential of the empire. Section 4. Following the cash. Profits are great, and assets are impressive, but as any empire builder will tell you, cash is king. Which brings us to our second movie. The cash flow statement really has one job: explain how your cash balance at the start of the year turned into the cash balance at the end of the year. Every single dollar moving in and out is meticulously sorted into one of three buckets. Operating activities. That's your bread and butter, the day-to-day business. Investing activities is planting seeds for tomorrow, like buying property or acquiring other companies. And financing activities is how you fund the whole shebang. raising capital, paying back debt, or returning money to your shareholders. Now, here's where modern tech empires unlock a massive cash superpower: unearned revenue. Remember Microsoft's cloud subscriptions? Customers pay for those upfront. But the rules of revenue recognition say Microsoft can only count that as official revenue slowly over the course of the year as the service is actually delivered. So it just sits there on the balance sheet as a liability. You get paid first, you work later. Because that cash is already safely sitting in the bank, increasing unearned revenue acts like a massive shot of adrenaline to your operating cash flow today, long before the official revenue is ever actually recorded. Pretty smart, right? Section 5, the transfer pricing puzzle. Finally, as our corporate empire expands, it inevitably crosses international borders. Subsidiary sister companies start selling goods to one another, and this introduces the incredibly high-stakes game of transfer pricing.
Imagine a multinational with two fully owned subsidiaries. MedDevice Ireland manufactures medical equipment and sells it to MedDevice France, who then turns around and sells it to a local hospital. Now, France taxes corporate income at 25%. Ireland's tax rate is exactly half of that, at just 12.5%. Naturally, the parent company has a huge incentive to recognize as much profit as legally possible over in Ireland, where the taxes are vastly cheaper.
Let's look at the math on, say, a €60,000 gross profit. If the internal transfer price is set super low, let's say right at the €40,000 manufacturing cost, all the profit lands in France. That means €15,000 in French taxes. Ouch. But if they push that internal price up to the maximum external selling price of €100,000, all the profit stays in Ireland, cutting the total tax bill in half to just €7,500. But you've got to be careful here. If a company games the system with extreme prices just to hoard profit in Ireland, they risk the absolute wrath of global tax authorities. France might reject the price, demand their cut, and if Ireland refuses to adjust, well, the company suffers double taxation. You end up paying taxes on the exact same profit in two different countries. No one wants that. So the ultimate solution to this puzzle is the arm's length principle. This is the bedrock rule of global transfer pricing. It states that the internal price used between two related sister companies must be exactly the same as if they were entirely independent businesses negotiating out on the open market. It's designed to keep corporations honest, and it's anchored in a really profound idea. Corporate taxes must be paid exactly where the true economic value is actually created. But how do you actually prove to global tax auditors where the profit was earned? Well, you build a corporate defense shield called a functional analysis. This is where you document the exact story of your empire. You have to prove which subsidiary takes the risks, holds the assets, and creates the value. If France contributes the brand name and assumes the product liability risk, while Ireland merely provides a physical factory, your analysis must reflect that. The entity taking the biggest risks and creating the most value is legally entitled to the highest profits. It requires rigorous, ironclad documentation to keep the whole empire safe from devastating audits. From isolating liability through holding companies to generating upfront cash flow through unearned revenue and orchestrating cross-border profits through transfer pricing, this corporate playbook is incredibly sophisticated. The numbers tell the definitive story of how global empires are built and sustained. But as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this question to ponder. Do these brilliant corporate tools exist primarily to build better, more resilient businesses, or do they exist simply to build better tax strategies? Thanks for learning with me today.